I hired a woman to clean the house while my whole family was out. An hour later, she called me and whispered, "Ma'am, is someone else in the house?" I froze. "No, why do you ask?" "There's a woman on the second floor." I started shaking. "Get out of there right now." I called the police and sped back home. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to Elderly Stories, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's gone. That day I woke up planning to clean the house. I wanted everything to be tidy, especially before the rains came when the humidity makes everything feel heavier. I rolled up my sleeves, grabbed a rag, and stood in front of the living room window ready to start. While I was cleaning the glass, the phone in my pocket buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was Elena, my childhood friend, who I hadn't seen in many years. Her cheerful voice filled the phone, telling me she was just passing through town for one day and wanted to invite me for coffee. I felt my heart warm hearing her familiar voice. Elena and I shared so many memories, running through the fields, staying up late, talking about our dreams. How could I say no, but thinking about everything I had to clean? I hesitated for a moment. I couldn't just leave the house like this. Then I remembered Caroline, the girl who lived down the alley near my house. She was in her early 20s, petite kind, and needed extra work to pay for her studies. I called her, and she accepted right away gratefully. I gave her specific instructions, clean the library scrub the second-floor stairs, and above all, be careful with my husband Stephen's old shelves where the dust collected. I left her a spare key and asked her to lock up tight when she finished. I drove to the coffee shop, The Garden, where Elena was waiting. We sat under a big tree. She told me about her life in the city, about her adult children, and I told her about Stephen, his job as a writer for the newspaper, and my quiet, though sometimes empty, days. We laughed, remembering old times. In the middle of our chat, my phone rang again. I saw the number. It was Caroline. I smiled, thinking she was calling to say she was finished. But when I answered, I didn't hear her usual timid voice. Instead, I heard heavy breathing like she was trying to hold back panic. "Mrs. Emily," she whispered, her voice trembling so much I could barely hear her. "Is someone else in the house?" My heart stopped. "No," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I'm having coffee. Oh, my husband is at the newspaper. He won't be back until tonight." "What's wrong, Caroline?" On the other end, there were a few seconds of silence, just her short, gasping breaths. Suddenly, her voice broke. "There's a woman on the second floor. I was cleaning the stairs and I saw her. She was wearing a long white dress. Her hair was a mess. She walked down the hall and disappeared into the last room." Her words were like an icy knife in my chest. I tried to stay calm, but the hand holding the phone was shaking. My first thought was that someone had broken in. The house was old, but we always locked everything carefully. How could anyone have gotten in? I apologized to Elena, telling her I had an emergency. She looked at me worried, but I just shook my head, unable to explain more. I told Caroline over the phone. "Caroline, get out right now. Lock the door and wait outside. I'm on my way." I called the police while I drove, my voice choked with anxiety. I explained that there was an intruder in the house trying to give details, though my mind was a whirlwind. I tried calling Caroline again, but she didn't answer. Every ring that went unanswered made my heart beat harder, like it was going to burst out of my chest. I imagined the worst, that something had happened to her, or that the intruder had attacked her. That day, the streets of my town seemed endless, even though I was flooring the accelerator. When I got home, the police car was already parked in front of the door. Caroline was sitting huddled on the step, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. I ran to her, hugged her, and asked anxiously, "Are you okay? Did you see anything else?" Caroline just shook her head, her lips pressed tight as if she couldn't speak a single word. 2 police officers, one middle-aged with a serious look and a younger one, came out of the house. They said they had checked every corner, every room, every closet under the beds, even the shed in the backyard. There was no one. There were no signs of forced entry. All the doors and windows were locked, without a single scratch or strange footprint. I sighed in relief, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. Caroline said, still trembling. "I swear I saw her, Mrs. Emily. She didn't seem real. She was like a shadow. I'm not brave enough to go up to the second floor again." I patted her shoulder to comfort her, but inside a doubt began to grow. This house was over 70 years old. It had belonged to Stephen's family before we moved in. The stone walls, the creaking wooden doors, the dark corners. They had always made me feel like they were hiding something. But a woman, I couldn't imagine it. Just then, I heard Stephen's car pull up the stone driveway. He got out, his face surprised to see the police car and me next to Caroline. I grabbed his arm and quickly told him what happened. I expected him to be worried like me, to want to find out what was going on. But Stephen just smiled slightly, a smile I had rarely seen. He went over to Caroline, gave her a pat on the shoulder, and said in a soft, almost mocking voice, "You were probably just tired and mistook a reflection for a shadow. Our house is old. It has a lot of corners that play tricks on your eyes." Caroline looked down without saying another word. I looked at her, my heart sinking. I knew she wasn't a girl prone to fantasies. She was hard-working, honest. She had no reason to make something like this up. But Stephen's look, his calmness, started to make me doubt myself. Maybe he was right. I apologized to the police for making them come out. A bitter shame rose in my chest. I paid Caroline, told her to go rest, and promised I would call her if I needed her. 3 months later, I officially retired. No more rushed mornings getting ready for work, no more endless meetings, no more days racing against deadlines. The old house in my quiet town became my world, but the change of pace made me lose sleep. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock in the darkness. On those nights, I started noticing strange sounds coming from the attic. At first they were faint noises, like something small accidentally falling to the floor. I convinced myself it was just the wind blowing through the old windows, or the wood creaking with the weather. But little by little the sounds became clearer, more distinct. I heard something like a chair being dragged across the floor, slowly, heavily. Then footsteps light but constant, as if someone was pacing back and forth. Sometimes I even heard the rustling of paper, as if someone was quietly turning the pages of a book. I told Stephen one morning while we were having breakfast in the kitchen. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I couldn't help feeling unsettled. "Honey, I've been hearing noises in the attic lately. It's not the wind. It sounds like someone is up there." Stephen yawned without looking up from the newspaper in his hands. He replied distractedly, "It's just rats, Emily. Our attic is old, it's full of junk. It's a paradise for mice. Tomorrow I'll buy some traps, set them, and that's it." The next day, just as he promised, Stephen brought home some big metal traps, the kind that make a loud clack when they snap shut. He placed them at the foot of the stairs, leading to the attic right under the old wooden door. "There," he said, dusting off his hands. "Now you can sleep peacefully, love." Strangely, the noises disappeared completely after that. No more footsteps, no more dragging chairs, no more rustling paper. I sighed with relief, convincing myself that Stephen was right. Maybe it was just mice, and I had worried for nothing. But then other strange things started happening. Things impossible to ignore. One afternoon I bought a piece of spicy sausage from the local market, my favorite for its intense flavor. Stephen, on the other hand, had never liked spicy food. He wouldn't even taste it. I carefully wrapped the sausage in paper and put it in the refrigerator, planning to enjoy it over the weekend. The next morning when I opened the door, I froze. A large piece was missing. The cut was uneven, as if someone had sliced it in a hurry. I asked Stephen, who was reading the paper in the living room, "Did you take some of the sausage from the fridge?" He looked up, frowning, as if my question was absurd. Yesterday I felt like trying something spicy, so I cut off a little piece," he replied distractedly. "It was good, actually." I stood there frozen, not knowing what to say. Stephen had never been able to stand spicy food. He even complained when I cooked something with too much seasoning. But I didn't want to argue, so I just nodded and walked away with doubt stuck in my chest. A few days later, the sausage had disappeared completely. I searched the refrigerator, checked the trash, but found no trace. This time, I didn't ask Stephen anything. An uncomfortable feeling like a cold stone began to settle inside me. Until one Saturday afternoon, Stephen and I went to a nearby city to visit some old friends. We left early in the morning and got back late at night. When we entered, the house was as silent as always. I went up to the second-floor bathroom to wash my face and shake off the day's fatigue. But when I stepped inside, I felt something cold and wet. The floor was soaked. The water seeped between my sandals, icy. The floor was completely wet, as if someone had just taken a shower. I looked around and saw drops still sliding down the tub walls, shining in the light. My heart was pounding. No one had been home all day. How was this possible? I called for Stephen, my voice trembling. "Come here, please. The bathroom is soaked like someone just took a shower." He came in, looked for a moment, and shrugged. "It must have been the afternoon rain that got in through the ceiling vent, love." I looked out the window. The street in front of the house was dry under the streetlights. "It hasn't rained, Stephen," I said, trying to sound calm. He frowned a little, annoyed. "Then it must be a leak in the old pipes. You're always worrying about nothing. I'll call a plumber tomorrow." But he never called a plumber. In the following days, the bathroom floor was dry, as if nothing had happened. I checked the pipes too, but everything seemed normal. Stephen's explanation, though it sounded reasonable, didn't erase the growing unease inside me. The noises in the attic, the missing sausage, the puddle of water with no source. It all seemed like disconnected fragments, but when I put them together, they formed a contradictory image I couldn't stop thinking about. A week later, I decided to clean Stephen's library. It was his pride and joy, a small room on the second floor with dust-covered oak shelves filled with hundreds of old books and documents. I always thought we should donate some of the books we barely read to the city library so they could get into the hands of people who needed them. That day, I stood in the middle of the room starting to sort books on Stephen's desk. There were piles of drafts, notes, and papers stacked chaotically, as if he never intended to organize them. When I lifted a heavy pile, my hand trembled and all the papers spilled onto the floor. The sound of the paper hitting the floor broke the silence of the room and made me jump. I bent down to pick them up, and just then a small wooden drawer that had been stuck for years popped open with a dry click. I hesitated for a moment and looked inside. There, under a pile of yellowed drafts, was a small hardcover notebook, dark brown leather with worn corners. It looked old. It didn't look like it belonged to Stephen. He always liked modern, neat things: laptops, pens, and pristine white paper. That notebook with its worn leather cover and a loose string seemed like it was from another era. With a mix of curiosity and fear, I picked it up, my hands shaking a little as I opened the first page. Inside were pages full of handwriting. The handwriting was soft, elegant, clearly a woman's. I flipped through the pages, skimming. They were story outlines, character descriptions, plot ideas. There was a fragment that spoke of a small village on a mountainside where a woman lived alone, waiting for someone who would never return. Another mentioned a buried secret with details that gave me chills. These ideas, though different, had a similar feel to the plots of Stephen's most famous novels, the ones that made him famous. My heart was pounding, my throat dry. It couldn't be a coincidence. I know Stephen too well. He hates writing by hand. He always said it was slow and messy, a waste of time. Everything he did, from novel drafts, work notes, to shopping lists, he did on the computer. I remember one time when I asked him to write down a restaurant's address instead of grabbing the pen right next to him, he turned on the computer to type it. So whose notebook was this? A secret collaborator, a fan who had given it to him. I sat in the chair, the notebook feeling heavy in my hands. A part of me wanted to show it to Stephen as soon as he got back. I wanted to hear his explanation. But I hesitated. I know him too well. Stephen always knows how to make everything sound logical. He would smile. He'd say it was a gift from a reader or an old idea from when he tried writing by hand. And I, like so many times before, would nod and let it all sink into silence. But not this time. I wouldn't let it go. Carefully, I put the notebook back in the drawer and pushed it all the way to the back, as if I was afraid it would disappear if I didn't keep it hidden. That night, I was sleepless again. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the ticking of the clock in the darkness. Around 2 a.m, a faint creak came from the hallway. It was a small noise, but in the silence of the night, it was perfectly clear, like a disturbing whisper. I sat up straight, my heart racing. I don't know why. I immediately thought of the small door that led to the attic, the one Stephen and I almost never opened. I got up carefully without turning on the light, afraid the brightness would shatter the truth I was about to discover. The faint moonlight came through the window just enough for me to see a crack. The attic door was ajar. A cold, damp draft drifted down, bringing the smell of old paper and confinement. I stood frozen, my feet glued to the floor. Fear mixed with curiosity paralyzed me. I went back to the room and gently shook my husband's shoulder. "Stephen, wake up. The attic door is open." Stephen groaned, half asleep, and got up annoyed. He put on his slippers and walked ahead of me down the hall without a word. But when we got there, the door was closed with the latch in place, as if no one had touched it. I stared at it looking for any sign. A scratch, a crack, nothing. Stephen turned to me with an expression of exhaustion and disappointment. "Emily," he said in a grave, tired voice, "you're too tense lately. You're not sleeping well. That's why you're seeing things that aren't there. Go back to bed. Go on." He walked me back. I lay down, but kept my eyes open, fixed on the ceiling. For the first time, I began to doubt myself. What if I really had imagined it all? In the days after I found the mysterious notebook, I tried to keep everything normal, though inside I was consumed by unease. I started watching Stephen's every move, every look, every word. He had recently picked up a new habit that only increased my suspicions. Around 10 at night, when I was already in bed with a book in my hands, ready to sleep, he would say he had to keep working in the library. "I need to concentrate a bit, Emily," he'd say in a soft but firm voice. "The manuscript is at a difficult part. You go to sleep first." I would nod, smiling, but every time the library door closed, I felt an invisible distance growing between us. One night I woke up thirsty. The clock on the table marked almost 1 in the morning, and the second hand seemed to be counting something in the darkness. I reached out to touch Stephen, but the bed was empty. The sheets were cold, as if he had never even been in bed. My heart skipped a beat. A wave of anxiety washed over me. Where was he? I put on a thin robe and went out into the hallway, thinking maybe he had fallen asleep at his desk, like other times when the publisher's pressure exhausted him. I walked down the dark hallway. The dim light from the living room cast strange shadows on the walls. I pushed open the library door, but the room was empty, the computer screen dark, the chair perfectly placed under the desk as if no one had been there. I called out softly, "Stephen." My voice echoed in the silence, but there was no answer. I went down to the kitchen, thinking maybe he had gone for water, but it was also empty. Only the moonlight came through the window, making the shadows of the dishes on the shelves look like ghosts. I started walking through the house, calling his name, my voice growing more shaky. My heart was pounding as if sensing I was about to face something. As I passed the stairs that led to the second floor, I heard a very soft footstep, almost imperceptible if you weren't paying close attention. I looked up, and in the dim hallway light, I saw a silhouette slowly coming down. It was Stephen. He was barefoot, walking carefully as if he didn't want to make the slightest noise. In his hand, he was carrying a porcelain plate, the kind we used for weekend dinners. When he saw me standing there, his eyes widened in surprise. A look of shock crossed his face. The plate slipped from his hands, hit the stone floor with a sharp clang, and shattered into pieces. That sound tore through the silence of the night, startling me, and I took a step back. I looked at the fragments, confused. The plate was empty. Clean. No crumbs or grease, as if it had been carefully washed. That only added to my confusion. I looked up at Stephen and asked with a trembling voice, "What were you doing up there at this hour? I thought you were in your office." He bent down and started picking up the pieces with slow movements, as if trying to buy time to think of an answer. He avoided my gaze and said in a forced tone, I got stuck on the end of the book. The editor won't stop pressuring me, you know. I needed a quiet place, so I went up for a while. I got hungry and brought up some food." I stood there watching him pick up the pieces, unable to fully believe him. I knelt down to help him. When our fingers brushed against the cold floor, I felt a cold chill of distance. The hand that once comforted me now chilled my skin. I knew he was under a lot of pressure from the publisher. The constant calls from Mr. Ramos, his editor, had him on edge. Maybe I told myself he just needed space to write. Maybe I was overreacting. The next morning the house felt heavy, as if an invisible cloud was floating over us. I woke up tired, my head full of unanswered questions. Stephen, avoiding my eyes, got up earlier than usual. I heard him making coffee in silence, the soft clinking of porcelain, but without the usual good morning. He locked himself in the library, closing the door firmly, and I knew he didn't want to be disturbed. I stood in the hallway, looking at that wooden door with a heavy heart. Around noon, Stephen came out dressed in a gray suit and carrying a small suitcase. He stopped in the living room where I was sitting with a cup of cold tea. "I need to get away for a few days," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Maybe I'll go up north for a bit. I need a change of scenery to get inspired." I looked up, surprised. Stephen never left without notice. He always planned everything in advance, consulted me on the itinerary. "Why so suddenly?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my heart was pounding. He didn't look at me directly. His eyes were fixed on the window where the sunlight filtered through the dust-covered glass. "The idea just came to me," he replied in a monotone voice. "Be careful while I'm gone." But just before he walked out the door, he turned suddenly and put his hands on my shoulders. His grip was stronger than usual, which made me jump. "Emily," he said in a low, serious tone, "while I'm gone, don't have anyone over." "Do you hear me? Especially not anyone from the newspaper. If Mr. Ramos, my editor, comes looking for me, tell him I went on a trip, and you don't know when I'll be back." I nodded, but a sense of unease grew inside me. His words didn't sound like a simple warning. They sounded like an order, an alert. Stephen had been gone for about 2 hours when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Mr. Ramos, Stephen's editor, with a young assistant. They both looked impatient. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, feeling my chest tighten. Stephen's words echoed in my head, but I couldn't just stand there without opening the door. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and forced a smile. Mr. Ramos didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight into the living room with an annoyed expression. "Mrs. Emily," he said harshly, "I know Stephen is home. Stop covering for him. We need the manuscript urgently. The deadline was 2 weeks ago." Keeping calm, I repeated exactly what Stephen had told me. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ramos, but Stephen left this morning to find inspiration. I don't know when he'll be back." Mr. Ramos let out an ironic laugh that chilled my blood. He pointed toward the Vargas' house, our neighbors across the street. "Don't lie to me anymore," he said sharply. "Mr. Vargas told me he sees the attic light on late every single night. If Stephen is working that much, he should have the manuscript ready by now, not hiding like this." The young assistant, a girl with a kind look, intervened. "Ma'am, we just want to help. If Mr. Stephen is having writer's block, he should talk to us. We can support him." Her tone was soft, but I couldn't concentrate anymore. Ramos's words hit me hard. "The attic light, I never noticed that. We hardly ever went up there. It was full of old boxes and cobwebs. Why would a light be on? And why would Mr. Vargas say he saw it every night?" My heart stopped. I tried to keep my composure as I walked them to the door, promising to let Stephen know as soon as I heard from him. But as I closed the door, I leaned against it, shaking. My mind was spinning. The scattered fragments were starting to fit together. The noises in the attic, the missing sausage, the puddle in the bathroom, the mysterious notebook, the empty plate, and now the light. Everything pointed to the same place, the attic, that forgotten space I hadn't been up to in years. I didn't feel scared anymore. Instead, a cold determination began to grow inside me like a silent flame pushing me to find the truth. I went to the backyard shed where a weak light from the street lamp snuck through the crack in the door. The smell of dust and old oil made me cough. I looked for the old folding ladder we hadn't used since we moved in. It was heavy, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if time had left it behind. I dragged the ladder down the second-floor hallway, each step feeling heavy, as if I were carrying all my accumulated suspicions with me. When I placed it under the hatch that led to the attic, I felt my heart pounding, but not from fear. It was an urgency, a certainty that I was about to discover something that would change everything. The metal latch was rusted so stiff that I had to use all my strength, grit my teeth, and push hard until it gave way. The sound of the metal clicked like a final warning. I lifted the cover of the door, and a wave of hot, damp air washed over me, bringing with it the smell of old paper and many years of confinement. That smell turned my stomach, but I didn't stop. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The cold white light cut through the darkness. I took a deep breath and went up. Each step creaked under my feet as if guiding me to a world I wasn't ready for. The attic was bigger than I imagined. A dark space full of stacked cardboard boxes, old furniture, covered with dusty white sheets and cobwebs hanging like ghostly curtains. The only light came from a small, dirty window casting opaque rays onto the wooden floor. I scanned the flashlight across the room, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. In the farthest corner of the attic there was a small, tidy space like an oasis in the middle of the chaos. A wooden table, a chair with a broken leg, and a dimly lit oil lamp casting a yellowish, almost dying light. And then I saw her, a woman sitting with her back to me. She was thin, with long, white tangled hair falling over her shoulders like a forgotten waterfall. She was wearing a yellowish-white dress with torn edges. The sound of a pencil scratching on paper was the only thing breaking the silence like a faint heartbeat of life. I froze, my throat closing up, unable to speak. I stammered, Who's there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the darkness. The pencil stopped. The woman turned her head sharply. Under the dim lamplight, her gaunt, pale face appeared. Her eyes were sunken, tired, but with something familiar that made me tremble. My world fell apart. My legs gave out, and I had to lean on an old trunk to keep from falling. It was Marlena, my sister. The face I hadn't seen in 30 years, only in dreams and blurry photos. Marlena, who the whole family believed was lost forever, was here in the attic of my house, in a state that broke my soul. Around her, a small world of secret existence, a huge pile of handwritten manuscripts, several empty cans, rolling water bottles, a dirty blanket on a thin mattress, and an old bucket for her needs, all living proof of a life in captivity. Marlena looked at me, her dry lips trembling. She tried to speak, her voice hoarse, as if she had forgotten how. "Sister, Emily, but she couldn't say more. She just looked at me, her eyes full of tears, as if begging me for a forgiveness I didn't yet understand. I didn't hear anything else. Tears streamed hot down my cheeks. I walked toward her like a sleepwalker, my legs trembling and my head spinning. Marlena, my sister, the one I had cried for until my soul ran dry, thinking I had lost her forever, was now here alive like a ghost inside my own home. I grabbed her thin arm, feeling every fragile bone under her skin. "Go downstairs," I said between sobs, my voice breaking. "Go downstairs now, Marlena." I helped her stand up. A storm of emotions raged inside me. Joy at finding her, pain at seeing her like this, and fear of the questions screaming in my head. Why was she here? Who did this to her? And Stephen? What did he have to do with this? I led her down the stairs. Her every step was unsteady, as if her legs didn't remember what it was like to leave that dark attic. The light of the house lit up her face, highlighting her sunken features and squinting eyes unaccustomed to the brightness. She looked like a creature of darkness, seeing the sun for the first time, and it broke my heart. Marlena, my sister, who once shone so brightly in our town, was now just a fragile shadow. I took her to the living room. I sat her down carefully in the most comfortable armchair, where the soft light of a lamp fell on her like a caress. I ran to the kitchen, filled a glass of cold water, and with trembling hands I brought it to her. Marlena tried to hold it, but her hands shook so much that the water spilled. I knelt, held the glass, and helped her drink sip by sip. Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want her to see me weak. She needed me to be strong, at least for now. After a few sips, Marlena started to cry. It wasn't a soft cry. It was a silent scream, as if all the years of repressed pain were bursting out at once. She collapsed onto my shoulder. Her thin body trembled, and I just held her tight, feeling every vertebra through her clothes. I didn't ask her anything. I just stayed there in silence, letting her cry, letting the tears wash away some of the weight she had carried for so long. When Marlena finally calmed down, she began to speak in a broken voice, barely a whisper. "Sister Emily," she murmured, looking at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I never thought I'd see you again, especially not like this. I took her hand, squeezing it gently, trying to give her some warmth. Tell me, Marlena, I said, my voice firm but tender. What happened? Why are you here? Then she started to tell me. Every word was a stab. She told me about that fatal night 30 years ago when her life fell apart. Richard, her boss at the paper, had asked her to his apartment to talk about work. Marlena, young and naive, believed him. But when she arrived, Richard was drunk. His look was no longer that of a boss, but of a predator. He tried to force himself on her, his voice thick with threats. Marlena fought back with all her strength. She pushed him, but he didn't stop. In the middle of the struggle, panicking, she grabbed a small marble statue and hit him over the head. "Sister, I just wanted him to stop," she said, her voice choked. I didn't want that to happen." But the blow was too hard. Richard fell to the floor, hitting his head on the coffee table, and lay motionless, showing no signs of life. Marlena said she froze, not knowing what to do, her mind blank with fear. Just then Stephen showed up. He said he was just stopping by to invite her to dinner at our house, but when he walked in, he witnessed the terrifying scene. "I wanted to call the police, sister," Marlena said, her eyes red. "I wanted to turn myself in, do the right thing, but Stephen wouldn't let me." He stood there looking at her with a chilling calmness. "You'll go to jail, Marlena," he said in a cold voice. "You'll lose your whole life. Let me help you. For Emily's sake, I'll protect you." I listened, my body cold. Stephen, the husband I loved, the one I trusted, had manipulated my sister using my own love for him. He convinced Marlena that hiding the truth was the only way to protect me, to keep our family from bearing the shame. That night, under the cover of darkness and the isolation of the Santa Rosa Hills, Stephen took Richard's body in his car alone. He dug a grave on the hillside in a place no one knew and buried the secret there. Then he brought Marlena to our house when I was already asleep and hid her in the attic. "It's just temporary," he told her, "until things calm down." But temporary turned into 30 years. Stephen turned Marlena into a ghost, living in secret in her own sister's house. When the police investigated, they discovered Richard had withdrawn a large sum of money before he disappeared. Stephen skillfully spread the rumor that Marlena and Richard were having an affair and had run off together. That story, combined with both of their disappearances, made everyone, including me, believe it. The investigation stalled, and Marlena, in the eyes of the world, became a fugitive who had abandoned her family. I stood there, tears streaming down my cheeks, but not from sadness. It was rage. It was the pain of betrayal. I remembered the days after Marlena's disappearance when I cried until I had no strength left, when our mother aged overnight from grief. I remembered Stephen's sudden literary career, his successful novels, the wealth and fame we achieved. Everything in the end built on my sister's pain and sacrifice. "I didn't know, Marlena," I whispered, my voice broken. "I didn't know. I trusted him. The first few years in the attic were hell, sister." Marlena continued, her voice hoarse, her gaze distant, as if reliving those dark days. "I lived in fear and guilt, and with an unbearable loneliness. Every night I dreamed the police were coming for me, or worse, that I'd be trapped in the darkness forever." She paused and took a shaky breath. To keep from going crazy, I started writing. I wrote about the stories I dreamed of, about worlds where I could be free, where I wasn't a shadow. I listened, feeling every word like a stab. I pictured Marlena, the vibrant young woman she once was, huddled in that cold attic, clinging to a pencil, like it was her last spark of hope. "And one day," she continued, "Stephen found my writings. I thought he would encourage me, but no, sister. His eyes lit up like he had discovered a treasure. He said, 'Marlena, you have talent. Write for me. I will be your voice to the world.'" I was paralyzed, my head spinning. I remembered that time when Stephen suddenly announced he was quitting his accounting job at the newspaper to follow his passion for writing. Friends and family were shocked because he had never shown any interest in literature before. I was so proud of him, thinking he had found a creative spark I never knew he had. But now the truth was a slap in the face. Stephen wasn't a writer. He was a thief who had stolen Marlena's talent, turning her into a ghostwriter, a literal ghost locked away in my own home. Marlena continued, her voice trembling, but full of bitterness. Many times I wanted to stop, to turn myself into the police. I couldn't stand the guilt, the feeling of living a life that wasn't mine. But every time I said so, Stephen threatened me. He said if I turned myself in, you would be the one to suffer most. He said you couldn't handle the shock of knowing your sister had committed a crime and your husband was her accomplice. He said you would lose everything, your family, your reputation, everything you love. I bit my lip. Tears streamed down my cheeks. Marlena's words tore my heart apart. Stephen had used my love and Marlena's love for me to manipulate her, to keep her in the darkness. I covered my face, trying to stop the sobs. "Forgive me, Marlena," I whispered, my voice broken. "I didn't know. I never imagined." But Marlena shook her head, took my hands, and her thin fingers squeezed mine tightly, as if trying to pull me out of the pain. "Don't apologize, sister," she said. "I let him manipulate me too. I was scared. I thought doing what he said was the only way to protect you." She said living in secret had become harder and harder, especially since I retired and spent more time at home. Before, since I left early and came back late and went to bed right after dinner to rest for the next day, I never noticed. "That's why I had to shower quickly when you two left," she said, looking down. "That's why I had to steal food from the refrigerator at night. I tried not to leave a trace, but sometimes I was clumsy." "Like the puddle of water in the bathroom or the piece of sausage you bought." I suddenly remembered all those strange details, signs I had chosen to ignore. Now it all made sense, but a sense too painful to accept. I thought about Stephen's novels that I had read and admired. I had always wondered why the settings seemed so old, so nostalgic, as if time had stopped decades ago. The characters didn't use cell phones. There was no internet. They wrote letters. They waited in vain like lost souls. Now I understood. It wasn't a literary style. It was because Marlena's world really had stopped 30 years ago. She was trapped in the past. She could only write about what she knew. Those stories of two people who never managed to find each other, they were a reflection of her own tragedy. A life cut off from the outside world. Marlena took my hands, her eyes filled with tears. "Sister Emily," she said, her voice shaky but firm, "I can't live like this anymore. I've paid for my mistake for 30 years in this prison. Now I want to face real justice. I want to turn myself in." Her words were a final stab, cutting the last threads of hope I had left. I had already lost her once when I thought she had run away. I didn't want to lose her again. But looking in her eyes, I knew it was what she needed. Release. The truth, no matter how painful. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I nodded, squeezing her hand tightly. "Okay, Marlena," I said, my voice choked. "I'll take you to the police station. We'll face this together." I hugged her, feeling her fragile body in my arms. My heart was full of pain, but also a small spark. The hope that even late, I could still help her regain her freedom. The next morning, I dressed Marlena in some of my clean clothes. The dress was big on her thin frame, but at least it made her look more presentable. We hadn't slept all night. I sat with her in the living room, telling her how the world had changed. The tall buildings, the smartphones no one could look away from, and the loved ones who were no longer with us. Marlena just listened in silence, her gaze distant, as if trying to imagine a world that had been stolen from her. I drove to the Central Police Station with Marlena sitting beside me. She was huddled in the passenger seat, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on the window, as if she were a stranger seeing an unknown planet for the first time. "Everything has changed so much," she whispered, amazed at the electric cars driving by, or the kids taking pictures with their phones. I took her hand and squeezed it gently, trying to give her some courage. "I'm here, Marlena," I said, my voice trembling. "We'll get through this together." At the station, I asked to speak directly to the chief of detectives. At first, they refused, saying we needed an appointment. But when I mentioned the disappearance of Marlena del Rosario, which happened 30 years ago, their attitude changed completely. An officer took us to an interrogation room, a small room with gray walls and a cold metal table. With my help, Marlena began to tell her story. Her voice was clear and calm, as if she had rehearsed these words 1,000 times in her mind. She spoke of that fatal night of Richard, of the accidental blow that took his life, and of how Stephen hid her in the attic, turning her into a ghost for 3 decades. The police listened in disbelief. One took notes nonstop, while another spoke into his radio with an urgent tone. Marlena's confession shook the entire station. The case files were immediately reopened. An investigation team was sent to my house to search the attic and collect evidence of Marlena's hidden life: the manuscripts, the food cans, the dirty blanket. Another group, following Marlena's precise directions, set out for the Santa Rosa hillside. After a few hours of searching, they found human remains buried under an old tree deep in the woods. Preliminary DNA analysis confirmed they belonged to Richard, the man everyone thought had run away with her. The arrest warrant for Stephen was issued that same day. Police set up a sting at our house, waiting for his return from his inspirational trip up north. I wasn't there, but later Mr. Vargas, our neighbor, told me Stephen didn't resist when they handcuffed him at the gate. He just lowered his head, his face expressionless, as if he had always known this day would come. Hearing that, I felt a strange emptiness. The man I once loved, the one I trusted blindly, was now just a distant shadow carrying the secret that destroyed my entire family. I hired the best lawyer for Marlena, someone who promised to fight for clemency. With the argument of self-defense and the 30 years she spent locked away, manipulated by Stephen, I believed justice would see her as a victim, not a criminal. I spent all day preparing things to take to her: clean clothes books and the dishes she loved most as a child. I wanted her to know that no matter what, I would always be by her side. But a few days later, as I was packing things to visit her, the phone rang. A cold, formal voice spoke on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Emily, we regret to inform you, Marlena del Rosario took her own life at the detention center last night." The phone slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. My world shattered all over again. Marlena, my sister, the one I had just gotten back, had chosen to leave forever, leaving me alone in a pain that had no words. She had told the truth, she had faced her past, but perhaps she couldn't bear another trial or the stares of an unforgiving world. The officer said Marlena had left a letter for me. They gave it to me that afternoon. I held it with trembling hands, looking at her soft, familiar handwriting, the same I had seen in the attic notebook. But now it was a clumsy, unstable script, as if she had used her last ounce of strength to write it. I opened the letter, and the tears fell before I read the first line. "Dear Sister Emily," she wrote, "when you read this, I will finally be truly free. For 30 years I wrote to survive, to not disappear, but I could never write under my own name. I lived as a ghost, and now it's time for that ghost to fade away. I don't regret telling the truth. It was the only right thing I did. Don't be sad." Think of it as me finishing my life story. The final manuscript is still in the attic, inside a wooden box under the table. It's the only work I wrote about myself, if you can let it bear the name Lucy del Rosario. I folded the letter, clutching it to my chest, soaking it with my tears. Lucy del Rosario. The name Marlena wanted to use if she ever became a writer, the name they stole from her. I knew I had to fulfill her last wish. I would find that manuscript and bring it to light so the world would know Marlena's story, not as a ghost, but as a woman, a writer, a soul who fought to be free. Stephen's trial took place a few months later, becoming a scandal that rocked the entire country. The press called it the Writer and the Ghost in the Attic Scandal. Newspapers filled their front pages with Marlena's story, a young woman imprisoned, stripped of her freedom, and used to build the fame of a man who didn't deserve it. Faced with irrefutable evidence, the remains of Richard found on the Santa Rosa hillside, the manuscripts found in the attic, and Marlena's testimony before she died, Stephen lowered his head and confessed. He was charged with multiple crimes: copyright theft, kidnapping, complicity in covering up a crime, and obstruction of justice. The sentence was a fitting end, but I felt no relief. For me, Stephen had died the day I discovered the truth, the day the man I loved became a stranger. I didn't attend the trial. I couldn't face him. I couldn't look into the eyes that once spoke words of love to me, but hid such a terrible secret. Instead, I returned to the house which was once a home, but now was just a space full of painful memories. One afternoon, as the sunlight faded on the cobblestone street, I decided to go back to the attic. This time I no longer felt fear or oppression. I climbed each step with a flashlight in hand, but my heart felt lighter, as if I were looking for a part of Marlena she had left behind. I found the wooden box under the table, just as she had written in the letter. It was a small old box, but well kept, as if it held her last treasure. Inside was a pile of manuscripts carefully handwritten on yellowed pages. Marlena's smooth, flowing handwriting was clear, as if she were right there telling me her story. I brought the box down to the living room, sat under the desk light, and began to read. It was an autobiography, a novel about her own life. She wrote about our childhood, about the days running through the fields of our town, about the dreams of being a writer she once confessed to me. She told of the terrible night that stole her future, the 30 years lived in darkness, and the incredible strength she had to keep her soul from breaking. Every page was a stab, but also a song of resilience, of a love for life, no matter how hard it was. I spent weeks editing the manuscript, carefully reviewing every line as if I were touching Marlena's soul. There were nights I stayed up until dawn, tears running down my face, as I read the passages where she spoke of her loneliness in the attic, or the times she imagined being free, walking out into the sunlight. The book wasn't just her story, but the voice of a forgotten person stripped of her identity. I knew I had to bring it to the world so Marlena wouldn't just be a name in my memory, but a true writer. I contacted the publisher that had worked with Stephen. At first they were hesitant, fearful of the scandal surrounding him, but when I sent Marlena's manuscript, they were completely convinced. "This is a masterpiece," the editor told me over the phone, his voice full of emotion. "We will publish it, and we will do it with all the respect Marlena deserves." The book was published under her real name, Marlena del Rosario. On the first page, instead of a prologue, I wrote only one sentence: "No one should be imprisoned in darkness, especially if they love the freedom." It was my message to her, to my dear sister, who I loved more than anything in this world. The book became a phenomenon. Readers from all over the country and then the world were moved by Marlena's life story. They admired her literary talent, the sincerity and poetry in every line. Stephen's old works, now re-released under Marlena's name, also sold again as a way of serving justice. Marlena, though she was gone, finally became a true writer, recognized and loved. I read the reviews, the letters from readers, and felt my heart tighten, but warmly. "You did it, Marlena," I thought. "You got your voice back." I still go up to the attic sometimes. It's no longer a place of confinement, but has been cleaned and turned into a small library. I open the window to let the sunlight in, illuminating the shelves where Marlena's works are placed with respect. I stand there looking out at the street full of life. Marlena's voice has been recovered, and justice in some way has been served. I know she is somewhere in the sunlight, in the pages of books, and in my heart, free forever. And when it was all over, I understood something. No wall is thick enough to imprison the truth forever. A lie, no matter how skillfully hidden, rots over time like the dust covering old shelves. Marlena's life proves that. Silence can sometimes be crueler than guilt, and that fear can turn a person into a ghost within their own existence. If there is one lesson I want to leave you with, it's this: dare to face the truth no matter how painful it may be. Speak up even if your voice trembles, because only when we dare to step out of the darkness are we truly free. And only when the truth is spoken can imprisoned souls find rest. The story you just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many women are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace, or would you face everything to get your voice back? I want to know your opinion because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.